Welcome back. If you're watching this alone, maybe turn on a light. Tonight, I have 5 stories for you. 5 accounts that were sent to me by real people. People who swear on everything they have that what happened to them was not a nightmare, not a coincidence, and not something that can be explained by science or logic. These are stories about black magic, about forces that most of us choose not to believe in because believing in them is simply too terrifying. Forces that exist in the dark corners of the world, passed down through generations of people who learned how to reach into something ancient and hungry and use it. You've been warned. Let's begin. My name is Daniel. I grew up in a small town in rural Louisiana, the kind of place where the houses sit far apart and the trees grow so thick that by 3 in the afternoon, the light is already dying. My grandmother lived at the end of a dirt road, and even as a kid I understood that her house was different. There were things hanging from the porch beams, dried herbs, animal bones wrapped in leather cord, small glass bottles filled with liquid I was never allowed to touch. My mother told me to ignore them. She told me Grandma was just old-fashioned. I was 26 when it started. I just moved into my first apartment, a second-floor unit in an old building on the south side of town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The first few nights were fine. Normal new place sounds. Pipes groaning. The couple upstairs walking around. That kind of thing. But on the 4th night, I woke up at exactly 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone immediately after I woke, and I woke up because something was wrong with the room. The air felt thick, dense, like the oxygen had been replaced with something heavier. And there was a smell, sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers left in stale water for weeks. I sat up in bed, and that's when I saw her. She was standing in the corner of the room, near the closet. A woman. Older. Her hair was loose and silver white, and it fell past her shoulders. She was wearing a long dark dress. And her hands were moving slowly in front of her, like she was weaving something invisible in the air. Her fingers kept looping and pulling and nodding over and over again. I couldn't move. I want to be honest about that. I tell people this story, and they always ask why I didn't run, why I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body was completely frozen. I could blink. I could breathe. But I could not move a single limb. She didn't look at me for what felt like a long time. She just kept working those invisible threads. And then, slowly, she turned her head. And she looked directly at me. Her eyes were wrong. I don't know how else to say it. They were the right shape, the right placement, but the color, there was no color. They were completely white. Not the white of blindness. White like something had been poured into them and filled them up. She smiled. It was the worst thing I have ever seen in my life. Not because it was a grotesque smile, not because it was full of teeth or distorted or monstrous. It was the smile of someone who has been waiting for a very long time and is finally satisfied. And then she was gone. The room was empty. The smell faded. I could move again. I told myself it was a dream. I told myself that twice. But when I turned on the light, I found something on the foot of my bed that had not been there the night before. A length of red thread, knotted 7 times. I threw it away immediately, wrapped it in a paper towel, and put it in the dumpster outside. Told myself that was the end of it. But over the next 3 days, things started to fall apart in my life in ways I could not explain. My boss called me into his office and told me my position was being eliminated. The same week they'd given me a good performance review. My car broke down on the highway, and the mechanic said the brake line had been partially severed in a way he'd never seen before. I fell down the stairs at work and broke 2 fingers. 3 days. One thing after another. On the 3rd night, she came back. Same corner. Same movements. Same wide eyes. But this time she spoke. I need to be clear. She did not open her mouth. The words came from somewhere else. From the air in the room. From inside my own skull. I'm still not sure. But I heard them. She said, "You threw away what I gave you. That was rude." I called my grandmother the next morning. I know how that sounds. But I didn't know who else to call. My grandmother didn't seem surprised. She asked me to describe the woman. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. Then she said, very quietly, "That is a lair woman. She latches onto places and the people in them. She was there before you moved in, and she is weaving you into the building. Every knot she ties is a piece of your life she is taking." I asked what I was supposed to do. My grandmother told me to buy a new length of red thread, to tie it around my left wrist, and not remove it for 30 days. She told me to leave a bowl of salt water under my bed, changed every morning. And she told me that the next time the woman appeared, I was to say, out loud, firmly, no hesitation, "I know what you are doing. I undo it." I did all of those things. The woman came one more time. 4 nights later. She appeared in the corner and began her weaving. And I sat up in bed and said the words, loud and clear, the way my grandmother told me to. The woman stopped. She looked at me, and for just a moment, that satisfied smile dropped. What replaced it? I don't have a word for it. Not anger. Something older than anger. Something that had been waiting so long it had turned into something else entirely. Then she was gone. She never came back. The string on my wrist turned dark brown over the 30 days, like it had absorbed something. When the 30 days were up, I buried it in the yard, the way my grandmother told me to. I still sleep with a lamp on. I'm not ashamed of that. And I never throw away anything I find on my bed. Whatever that woman was doing with those threads, whatever she was weaving, I don't think she was finished. I think she was interrupted. And I think about that sometimes. I think about wherever she went when she left my apartment, and whether she found someone else to weave into that building. Someone who didn't have a grandmother who knew what red thread was for. I think about that a lot. Maya was 22 years old when she made the mistake of buying something she should have left alone. She told me this story herself, sat across from me at a coffee shop, both hands wrapped around her mug, speaking quietly because she said that even talking about it too loudly made her feel like it could hear her. Maya was the kind of person who loved antiques. Flea markets, estate sales, old junk shops with dusty shelves and the smell of decades baked into the walls. She found beauty in old things, history in discarded objects. So when she walked into a thrift store in a small Ohio town during a road trip and spotted it on the back shelf, her first instinct was curiosity. It was a doll, about 14 inches tall. Old cloth body, porcelain head, hands, and feet. The clothes it wore were handmade. a dark dress with tiny embroidered symbols along the hem that Maya said she didn't recognize at the time. The hair was real hair, dark brown, sewn into the scalp. The face had been painted over completely. Someone had taken black paint and covered every feature, eyes, nose, mouth, until the face was a smooth, featureless oval of matte black. Maya thought it was art. She thought someone had done it deliberately, as a statement, as an aesthetic choice. She bought it for $3. She put it on the shelf above her desk in her apartment. The first night, she woke up at 3 a.m. with a feeling that she was being watched. She looked around the room, and her eyes went immediately to the doll. She said it was the same as it always was, sitting there, faceless, still. She told herself she was being ridiculous and went back to sleep. The second night, she heard something. A soft sound, like fabric moving. She turned on the light. The doll was in the exact same position. Nothing in the room had changed. But the sound? She said it was like something breathing, but wrong. Too slow. Too deliberate. On the third night, she woke up, and the doll was not on the shelf. It was on the floor directly beside her bed, facing her. Maya screamed. She knocked it across the room, getting out of bed. She grabbed it with a towel. She didn't want to touch it with her bare hands, she said, and she's not sure why, just that she instinctively didn't want skin contact, and she shoved it into a box and put the box in her car trunk. She thought that was enough. It wasn't. That same night, sleeping in her apartment with the doll locked in her car trunk in the parking lot, she had the dream. She was standing in a field at night. Flat, black ground stretching in all directions under a sky with no stars. And in the center of the field, the doll. Standing upright. Human-sized. The faceless black oval where features should be, and then, slowly, features beginning to form beneath the paint. Not painted features. Real ones. Pressing through the black from underneath. A nose. A brow. A mouth, opening slowly. The mouth said one word. Maya won't tell me what the word was. She says that's the only part of the story she's keeping. She says she's afraid that even repeating it might do something. I respected that. She woke up shaking. Called her older sister, who drove over that night. Her sister was the one who suggested calling a priest. Maya isn't religious, but she was out of options. The priest they found was an older Filipino man who came recommended by someone in the sister's church. When Maya described the doll, the covered face, the embroidered symbols, the real hair, the priest was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do not take that doll back inside your home. Whatever you do." He came to the parking lot. He stood at the trunk of Maya's car for several minutes without opening it. Just standing. Maya said he was praying quietly. She said she couldn't hear the words, but she could see his lips moving fast. Then he opened the trunk, looked at the box, and closed it again. He said, "This was made for someone. A specific person. Whoever made it put a target into it, a name, a face, an intention. When you bought it, you accidentally became the nearest living match to whatever the maker was reaching for. It began to attach to you." He said the doll needed to be destroyed, but not simply thrown away or burned, because burning would release whatever was inside it into the open air. He said he knew the proper way to do it, and that Maya should not be present. She gave him the box. She never saw the doll again. But Maya told me one last thing before we ended our conversation. She said that for about 2 weeks after she gave the priest the doll, she kept seeing something in reflective surfaces, windows, mirrors, the dark screen of her phone before she unlocked it. A small shape, about 14 inches tall, standing just behind her shoulder. And then one day it was gone. I don't know if he destroyed it, she told me, or if it just got bored. She paused and looked down into her mug. I hope it was the first one. This next account comes from a man named Robert, a contractor in his late 30s who, in his own words, has seen everything there is to see in old houses, and nothing ever bothered him. Until this. Robert was hired to renovate an old Victorian home in upstate New York. The house had been empty for almost 15 years following the death of the previous owner, an elderly woman who had lived there alone. The estate had been tied up in legal disputes between distant relatives, and by the time anyone got around to actually dealing with the property, it had settled into serious disrepair. Robert and his 3-man crew started with the basics: roof, foundation, then interior walls, stripping out the old plaster and lath to rewire the electrical and add insulation before putting up drywall. It was on the second day of interior demolition that they found the first one. Inside the wall of the master bedroom, between 2 studs, tucked in a space that had clearly been designed for it, because the lath had been cut away and replaced in a way that was deliberately concealed, was a small bundle. Robert described it: a piece of dark cloth tied with a cord about the size of his fist. His first instinct was that it was an old lucky charm, a folk remedy, something people put in walls for protection. He'd heard of that kind of thing before. He set it aside and kept working. They found the second one inside the kitchen wall, the third in the basement ceiling, the fourth behind the bathroom tile, the fifth, and Robert's voice got quieter when he got to this one, was inside the wall of what had clearly been a child's bedroom, tucked right behind where the headboard of a bed would have sat. 5 bundles, placed throughout the house in what he began to realize was not random. They formed a pattern, a deliberate circuit around the interior of the house. When he laid out their positions on a rough floor plan he'd sketched, he could see it clearly. They were connected. They were part of something. He called the estate lawyer, who said she had no idea what they were and wasn't sure it mattered. Just dispose of them. Robert didn't want to touch them anymore. He'd made the mistake of opening the first one out of curiosity. Inside the cloth was a small collection of items, a piece of what looked like bone, something dark and dry that might have been a finger. He couldn't be sure. 3 teeth, and a folded piece of paper with writing on it. Not English. Not any alphabet he recognized. The letters were angular and dense, written in something that had dried to dark brown. He rewrapped it and didn't open any of the others. That night, the first of the crew refused to come back. A man named Gene, who had worked with Robert for 6 years, texted him at 10 p.m. and said simply, "I don't know how to explain this, but I can't go back to that house." Robert assumed he was joking. Gene was the least superstitious person he knew. In the morning, Gene called instead of showing up. He said that after he'd gone to sleep the previous night, he dreamed about the house. Specifically about the bedroom where the last bundle had been found. He said in the dream he opened the door to that room and there was a woman inside it standing with her back to him. He said she turned around slowly and her face was the paper from the bundle, just flat, covered in that dense, angular writing where her features should have been. She opened her mouth, and the writing began to fall out like sand. Jean was done. Robert went back with his remaining 2 guys. They agreed. Finish the job. Don't touch the bundles except to move them. Hand them over to whoever wanted them. But that second day, things started going wrong on the work site in a way Robert had never experienced. Small things at first. Tools going missing and turning up in rooms no one had entered. Measurements that were clearly correct on paper refusing to work in the actual space. Boards cut to the right length and somehow too short when they got to the wall. The radio turning itself off mid-song. Then one of the other crew members, a young man named Tony, cut his hand on a saw blade in a moment where he said, and Robert confirmed he was nearby and saw it happen. The saw turned itself on. Tony had not touched the switch. Robert sent him to urgent care and stood alone in that house. He told me, "I'm not a superstitious man. I want to be clear about that. I've renovated haunted houses, supposedly. Older houses than this. Nothing ever made me feel the way this house made me feel. There was something wrong with the air in there. Like the air had a temperature, but it was a temperature that didn't match any number on a thermometer. Cold, but not cold. Just wrong." He gathered all 5 bundles into a single box. He took them outside. And he called the estate lawyer and told her he needed 1 week before he could continue. He drove the box to a woman his mother had always gone to when Robert was growing up, a woman who practiced a form of folk spirituality, the kind that doesn't have an easy English name. He didn't expect her to take it seriously. She did. She looked in the box without touching anything and said, "The woman who lived there was using this house as a vessel. These were meant to keep something inside, to contain it. She put them in the walls so it couldn't leave." Robert asked what she meant by something. The woman said, "Something she called. Something she made a deal with. Something she needed to keep from escaping while she was still alive to manage it." Robert said, "And now she's dead." The woman looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "For 15 years, it has been sitting in that house with no one to manage it and no way to leave." She told him the bundles had to be properly dispersed and neutralized. She told him she would handle it. She told him to go back and finish the renovation. He asked her, "Is it gone now? Is the house safe?" She said, "The house is empty now. Safe is a different thing." The renovation was completed. The house sold 6 months later to a young family. Robert drove past it once, about a year after they moved in. All the lights were off even though it was the middle of the afternoon. Every light in every window, completely dark. He didn't stop. This one is told from the perspective of a woman named Serena, and it is the one that disturbed me the most out of the 5 because of how ordinary it began. Serena's grandmother passed away when Serena was 28. The grandmother, everyone called her Nana Lupe, was 91 years old, had lived a full life in a small town in New Mexico, and her death was not a surprise. Sad, but expected. Serena was close to her. She'd spent summers at Nana Lupe's house her whole childhood. When the family divided up the grandmother's belongings, Serena asked for the recipe box, a wooden box painted with flowers that had sat on the kitchen counter for as long as Serena could remember. It was the kind of thing you keep for sentimental value. She wanted to be able to make Nana Lupe's tamales, her red chili sauce, her bizcocos. She took the box home. It sat on her own kitchen counter for 2 weeks before she opened it. When she finally did, most of the cards inside were exactly what she expected. Recipes in her grandmother's tight, neat handwriting. Ingredients and steps for dishes Serena had eaten her whole life. But at the very back of the box, behind a divider she had to lift to see, was a section that was different. The cards there were older. The paper was different, heavier, more yellowed. The handwriting was not her grandmother's. It was someone else's, cramped and angular, written in a mix of Spanish and something else that Serena didn't recognize. And the recipes were not food. Serena told me about them slowly, reading from notes she'd made. One was titled in Spanish. She translated it roughly as, "To make someone turn away." Another was labeled something like, "Binding the will of an enemy." A third was titled, chillingly simply, "For taking." The instructions on these cards were detailed and specific. They called for ingredients that were not available in any grocery store. There were ratios and timing and phases of the moon. There were specific words to be spoken aloud at specific moments in the process. There were warnings, written in that cramped handwriting, about what would happen if the steps were not followed exactly. Serena did not follow any of them. I want to make that clear. She read them with a growing and deeply uncomfortable realization that she was looking at something real. Not a game. Not folklore. Real working instructions for something she did not have a name for. But one card she didn't notice immediately, tucked underneath the others in the back section, had her grandmother's handwriting on it. Modern. Recent. It was a note. To Serena. By name. Serena's hands were shaking by this point in the story. She said, "She knew I was going to find it. She left it for me. She must have put it there right before she died." The note said, "Serena has memorized it. Mija, you found this because you were supposed to. These came from your great-great-grandmother. I kept them because they are part of our family, and someday someone in this family will need to understand what we are. I never used them. I promised God I would never use them. But I want you to know they are real. And I want you to know that what was given to your great-great-grandmother is still alive. It is patient. And when it decides it has been patient long enough, it will come looking for the person in the family who has the box. I am sorry to pass this to you. I did not know how else to warn you. Burn this section if you want, but it will not help. It already knows you have it." Serena burned the cards. All of them, including the note. She burned the entire back section of the recipe box in her kitchen sink. She kept the regular recipes. She slept fine for about 3 weeks. Then the knocking started. Always from inside the walls. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. Never any other time. She called a plumber, water hammer, he thought, or a pipe expanding with temperature change. He checked everything. Found nothing. The knocking continued. Her daughter, she has a daughter, 7 years old, started talking about a woman she could see standing outside the window of her bedroom at night. Serena's daughter's room is on the 2nd floor. Serena's daughter described the woman as old, very old, and she said the woman was always looking up at the window and smiling, and sometimes she held things in her hands that she seemed to be offering. Her daughter couldn't see what the things were. She said they were too dark to make out. Serena took her daughter to her parents' house and has not yet gone back. She called her mother, Nana Lupe's daughter, and asked about the recipe box, about the back section, about what Nana Lupe might have known. Her mother was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "I told your grandmother to destroy that box 40 years ago. She said she couldn't bring herself to do it." "Why not?" Serena asked. Another long pause. "Because she said it would be like turning your back on part of the family." Serena asked what that meant. Her mother said, "Mija, there are things in this family that go back a very long way. Things your grandmother and I agreed we would not talk about. Things I still do not want to talk about." She has not answered Serena's calls since. Serena is currently staying with a friend. Her apartment has been empty for 6 weeks. She hired a cleaning service to go in and retrieve some of her things, and the cleaning woman, who Serena had never spoken to about any of this, texted her afterward and said, "I don't know if this means anything to you, but when I was in there, I kept hearing knocking in the walls. Is everything okay with your pipes?" The recipe box is still on the kitchen counter. Serena doesn't know what to do about it. She doesn't know what to do about any of it. Neither do I. The last story is different from the others. It's different because the person at the center of it is not someone who was targeted, not someone who stumbled into something accidentally, not someone who inherited something they didn't ask for. This is the story of a man named, and he asked me to call him only Marcus. He found me. He reached out through my channel and asked if we could speak. He said he needed someone to tell this to who wasn't going to call the police or commit him to a hospital. I met him over video call. He is in his mid-40s. He looks, he said, much older than he did 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Marcus was in a business dispute with a former partner, a man who had, by all accounts, genuinely wronged him, stolen clients, taken credit for work that was Marcus's, damaged his reputation in their industry in ways that cost Marcus real money and real opportunities. And the legal system had failed Marcus. The case dragged on, the lawyers took money Marcus didn't have, and in the end, a settlement was reached that Marcus felt was profoundly unjust. He was angry. He was the specific kind of angry that doesn't go away. The kind that sits in your chest at 3 a.m. and makes you think about things you wouldn't say out loud in daylight. Someone in an online forum, he's embarrassed about this, the online forum, mentioned a woman. A specific woman, no name given, who could be contacted through a series of steps that were outlined in the thread. The thread was old and the original poster was gone, but other people had replied over the years, and the replies were not the skeptical dismissals you'd expect. They were careful, nervous. Some of them warned against it. One person said only, "I used her once. It worked. I wish it hadn't." Marcus followed the steps. He won't tell me all of them. He said some of them were embarrassing, and some of them were things he doesn't want repeated. But eventually he reached her, through what he described as a series of increasingly unusual email exchanges with an address that he thinks may have been routed through multiple servers in ways he doesn't understand. He told her who he wanted targeted. He told her what he wanted to happen to this man. She named a price. It wasn't money. Marcus won't tell me what it was. He said only, "It was something I had. Something I was willing to give up." He agreed. 6 weeks later, his former partner's business began to collapse. Not slowly. Catastrophically. A major contract fell through. Then a lawsuit from a different former associate. Then a data breach that exposed the company's internal communications. The man lost almost everything he'd built over 15 years in less than 4 months. Marcus felt satisfied. For about 2 weeks, he felt completely satisfied. Then things started happening to Marcus. Not catastrophic things. Not at first. Small things. He kept losing objects, his keys, his wallet, his phone, and finding them in places he absolutely knew he had not put them. He started having trouble sleeping. When he did sleep, he had the same dream repeatedly. He was in a house he didn't recognize, walking through room after room, and in every room there was a door that was slightly open, and behind every door was darkness, and from the darkness there was a sound. Not a voice. Something older than a voice. He woke from these dreams exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fix. His work began to suffer. He made mistakes he wouldn't normally make. Lost clients of his own. His personal life deteriorated. A relationship of 2 years ended, he said, for reasons that didn't make sense and that his partner at the time couldn't fully articulate. She told him something felt different about him. Off. He contacted the woman again. She responded eventually. He asked if what was happening to him was connected to what she had done. She said, "Of course." He asked why. She said, "You hired me to destroy someone. That kind of work leaves a mark on the person who asks for it. I told you this. You agreed." Marcus said he didn't remember her telling him that. She sent him back his own email from 3 years prior. And there it was. A paragraph he had written himself and completely forgotten. "I understand that requests of this nature have a cost to the requester as well as the target. I accept that cost." He had written it himself. In his own words. He had agreed to be marked. He asked her how to undo it. She told him it could not be undone. The work was done. What he felt, the exhaustion, the dreams, the dissolution of his life, was the price, spreading out over time in ways that were unpredictable. She said, "Think of it as interest on a loan. You borrowed from something dark. The dark collects." Marcus has spent the last 3 years trying to find someone who can help him. He says some people have made things temporarily better. Some have made things worse. No one has been able to remove what he describes as the feeling of something permanently attached to him, just behind his left shoulder. A weight. A presence. A thing he cannot see, but can always feel. He told me, "I want people to know. That's why I'm telling you this. Not because it makes me feel better. It doesn't. But I want people to know that this stuff is real. And that if someone offers you a way to hurt someone, truly hurt them, destroy them, the way you're thinking about late at night, there is always something on the other side of that offer. And it is not on your side." I asked him what he would do differently. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I would have let it go. I would have been angry and stayed angry, and eventually I would have been fine. Instead, I'm this. And he's, my former partner, he's rebuilding. I saw his LinkedIn the other day. He's doing okay. He moved to a different city and started over." He paused. "And I have something behind my left shoulder that doesn't leave." He ended the call shortly after that. I think about Marcus sometimes. About the email he wrote to himself that he couldn't remember writing. About the price he paid that he thought was something else entirely. About the woman on the other end of those emails. About what she is, and how long she has been offering this service, and how many people like Marcus have said yes. About the thing behind his left shoulder, and whether it can hear me right now talking about it. 5 stories. 5 encounters with something most of us spend our whole lives hoping is not real. A woman weaving red threads in the dark. A doll with a covered face that already knew your name. A house that was built to contain something that had nowhere left to go. A recipe box that remembered a debt. And a man who made a transaction he didn't fully read before he signed. The question I keep coming back to, after all of these accounts, after all of the people who have sat across from me, or spoken to me, or sent me their stories, is not whether these things are real. I think you already know what I believe about that. The question is, what do they want? The woman in the corner with her threads. The present behind Marcus's left shoulder. Whatever sat in that house in upstate New York for 15 years waiting to be released. What do they want? I think the answer is the same as it always has been. The same as it was before language, before recorded history, before anyone thought to write it down or pass it on. They want in. They want to be close to something warm and living. They want to be felt, even if the feeling is fear. Maybe especially if the feeling is fear. Stay safe tonight. Keep your lights on if you need to. And if you wake up at 2:47 in the morning and the air in your room feels wrong, don't look at the corners. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories.